Tell me, what does a YouTuber want with being a wiki? There's bracing sea air, peace and quiet, beautiful views, mermaid booty, comfy jumpers, and so much more. It's a perfect escape for one who has had enough of society or has some tragic backstory to run away from. However, complete isolation from civilization isn't suited to everyone. You'd be spending a lot of time outside, and the weather can be pretty brutal, even by Scottish standards, with very high winds and deadly waves. You'd also be stuck with two other guys in very cramped conditions with barely even basic amenities. And that's the job at its most comfortable. So, being a lighthouse keeper is not only physically but also very psychologically taxing, as there was little to no contact with the outside world for very long stretches of time. It's hard to touch grass on a barren rock, and the isolation is very, very rough on most psyches. But not for you watching, obviously. I'm sure you're all very used to that by now and would do just fine. After all, why have a goon cave when you could have a goon tower? Nevertheless, a whole lot can very easily go wrong in the life of a lighthouse keeper, and it's so hard to call for help that relief vessels would simply arrive on a frighteningly empty island. And when an entire crew disappears all at once without any trace or hint of what happened, imaginations go wild. Did they succumb to the elements? Did they lose their minds? Or did something much spookier and much more sinister happen? The Eilean Lighthouse disappearance. And a comment on this video because it really helps me in the algorithm. But before we get into today's video, we'll set aside some time for this video's sponsor, Holzkern. Time. What a thing. You can feel it fly away or drag down to a halt. You become keenly aware that it slips away in a never-ending trickle of entropy. It felt like only a few days ago that I had hair. But anyway, what better way to keep count of your precious time than by using today's sponsor, Holzkern. Holzkern is an artisanal jewellery company specialising in watches and other fine baubles and trinkets. Founded in Austria, the historical heartland of the HRE, Mozart and Strudels, that is to say, very cultured and highbrow. And just like their national legacy, Holzkern's product line is equally distinguished, with 150 employees dedicated to crafting some exquisitely tasteful jewellery and accessories and delivering them to your door. Take, for example, this sublime marble and maple snowmelt watch. With its masterfully engineered frame and crisp finish, it is a perfect choice for timekeeping that'd leave even the most fleeting of Time Lords sanguine. Besides, it's got marble in it, which looks very, very smart, and it makes me feel smart, and I like that a lot. Watch is not your style, then how about this chic sodalite and silver binomial ring, with its expert craftsmanship and mesmerising sodalite core. You too can have a fist full of alluring minerals clad on your person. The ring reminds me of something that would have been wrought by the elves in the Eldar days, but without the multi-generational curses. Of course, these two pieces are a drop in the bucket that is the catalogue at Holzkern. With over 1,000 unique types of fine jewellery like these, it's safe to say there will be a watch or ring just for you. Holzkern also has free express shipping and a 25-day money-back guarantee. Our time on this earth may be finite, but at least with Holzkern, we can spend it that bit more wisely. So, scan the QR code on the screen, or go to the link down in the description, or the link right here on the screen, and get 15% off of your order by using code COUNT. Eilean Moor is the largest of the Flannan Isles, which are located off the Hebrides off the coast of Scotland. Being a really hazardous spot for shipping, a lighthouse was built in 1899, which would flash twice every 30 seconds, and it could be seen from 20 miles away in good weather. However, visibility very rarely reached that range because Scotland. Looking after the lighthouse were three keepers. The principal keeper in the middle, James Ducat, his second assistant keeper on the left, Thomas Marshall, and on the right, occasional keeper, William MacArthur. MacArthur was a local tailor from Lewis who wasn't really part of the crew, but filled in for Ducat's first assistant keeper, William Ross, who was on sick leave. Hence the title, Occasional Keeper. Rounding out the team was a fourth keeper who would stay on the mainland as relief, so that everyone would be cycled in and out every 2 weeks to avoid a Willem Dafoe situation. The keeper's job was mainly to maintain the light and fog signals, but they were also charged with cleaning and maintaining the lighthouse itself and all of the relevant equipment on the island. Their duty started when they nervously arrived on the 7th of December 1900. While they were reassured by the fact that they could hoist a signal flag if they ever needed anything, they were still somewhat concerned about the monitoring of the island. Quickly justifying this concern was a heavy fog that descended over Eilean Moor for the next 2 weeks, even making the light hard to see from the observer's observation point on the Isle of Lewis, 21 miles away. The shore station was also there where the keepers' families lived. Annoyingly, this fog wasn't particularly unusual as the Flannan Isles have a reputation for absolutely atrocious weather, even by Scottish standards, and the seas were just as treacherous. The North Atlantic is basically hell, and the keepers were stuck right in the middle of it with the entire world blind to their welfare. On the 15th of December, exactly what you would expect eventually happened. A steamer named Arctur passed by the island and noted that the light wasn't on. Upon being unfortunate enough to arrive in Leith 3 days later, her skipper reported this oddity to little avail. But a few days later, another vessel happened to get a closer look at what was going on. You see, it was time for a changing of the guard and the lighthouse tender. The SS Hesperus was out on her fortnightly trip to the island on the 26th of December, carrying stores and the relief keeper, Joseph Moore. The Hesperus was actually due to arrive on the 20th, but storms delayed her passage by 6 days. So it wasn't until 11 days after the lack of light first being noticed that something was finally done about it. When the Hesperus's crew noticed that the light was off and the island was eerily quiet, they called out to the lighthouse with a whistle and siren, and they even fired a rocket to try and get the keeper's attention, but they received no answer. They then made their way to the bottom of the cliff on the east landing, where the keepers were supposed to meet them and help with docking. But no one showed up. As the Hesperus's captain, Jim Harvey, put it, on our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Not only was the landing deserted, but there was also no flag on the flagstaff nor provision boxes left out for the crew, which was the procedure. After the arduous process of docking without help, Moore disembarked and he wondered to himself, where are the other keepers? Moore then climbed the 160 steps up the cliff to the lighthouse, reportedly spotting what was described as 3 giant black birds perched above. Never a good sign for any seaman. But other than these strange birds, Moore found no one at home. Just a table set with a half-eaten dinner, an overturned chair, a stopped clock, unmade beds, a fireplace that hadn't been lit in days, and a canary sitting in a cage. Most curiously, Moore found an oilskin, which is like a waterproof overcoat, still on the hook that belonged to MacArthur, which shouldn't be an issue since it was forbidden for the lighthouse to be completely unattended. Therefore, someone would have stayed inside as the others went outside. But No one was there. So, with his oilskin still hanging on the hook, MacArthur had obviously gone outside without his rain gear, despite there being a storm, which seems like the keepers had all rushed out of the lighthouse in a hurry because of some kind of emergency. After this first sweep, Moore headed back to the Hesperus with the bad news. As he wrote in a letter 2 days later, "I did not take time to search further, for I only too well knew something serious had occurred. I darted out and made for the landing." 2 sailors then helped look for the keepers more thoroughly. The whole island was searched, and while no one was found, some very interesting discoveries were made. While all was normal on the east landing where the Hesperus had docked, the west landing on the other side of the island was in quite a state. Mooring ropes and other equipment, including a lifebuoy, were missing. Ropes were strewn across the rocks, and the supply box was smashed and its contents were scattered everywhere. It seemed like something pretty powerful had hit the west landing, because iron railings were bent, bits of a railway track used to move supplies and paraffin fuel had been actually torn away, and a boulder described as 20 hundredweight, which is just over a metric ton, had rolled out of place. Turf had even been ripped up 10 metres away from the cliff edge. And considering the fact that this cliff is about 60 metres high, it must have been a big fucking wave that did that. But on the bright side, the most important thing on the island was found undamaged. While no one had been there to switch it on for a few days, the lamp was still in full working order. Perfectly clean, full fountain, the works. While no one knew where the keepers were or why they had left, they clearly hadn't been slacking in their duties. After Moore and the others reported back what they had found, Captain Harvey passed all of it on to the authorities with a telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board HQ in Edinburgh, which read as follows. "A dreadful accident has happened at Flannan's. The 3 keepers, Ducat, Marshall and the Occasional, have disappeared from the island. On our arrival there this afternoon, no sign of life was to be seen on the island. Fired a rocket, but as no response was made, managed to land Moore, who went up to the station but found no keepers there. The clocks were stopped and other signs indicated that the accident must have happened about a week ago. Poor fellows, they must have been blown over the cliffs or drowned trying to secure a crane or something like that. Night coming on, we could not wait to make something as to their fate. I have left Moore, MacDonald, Boymaster and 2 seamen on the island to keep the light burning until you make other arrangements. Will not return to Oban until I hear from you. I have repeated this wire to Muirhead in case you are not home. I will remain at the telegraph office until it closes, if you wish to wire me." When it was time for the Hesperus to go off on her way, Moore and 3 other sailors stayed behind on the island to maintain the light until everything blew over. 2 days later, Moore wrote a letter to set the record straight as he saw it, reporting what he did and what he discovered in more detail. But this wasn't the most important piece of paperwork that came from the island that might have given a hint as to what could possibly have happened to the keepers. There was the Lighthouse logbook. So, what were the official last words of the missing keepers? Well, it is said that the logbook reported a big storm that rocked the island on the 12th of December, with Marshall writing of, and I quote, "severe winds, the likes of which I have never seen before in 20 years. Low spirits were also reported, with Ducat being described as very quiet and MacArthur as having been crying. The following day, the log lamented, the storm continues and we have been compelled to leave the lighthouse. God help us." And also saying that all 3 men were praying. It sounds very, very scary. It sounds like something might have happened to them in that storm that could explain everything, right? Nah, the final entry was made on the 15th, which simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." The logbook was a dead end. But here is the funny thing that has everyone still talking about this story so many years later. The storm that the keepers were supposedly so scared of didn't actually hit the area until the 17th. There were no reports of any storms in the area in the days before the men disappeared. And even if they were caught in a storm, they were holed up in a brand new lighthouse, staying safe and cosy 150 feet above sea level. I suppose the men must have just gotten extremely unlucky and got hit by some very, very localised extreme weather. Or maybe the entries were made up. Well, to get to the bottom of it, the Lighthouse Board Superintendent Robert Muirhead, who had personally recruited the lighthouse keepers and liked to check in on them as much as possible, arrived on the island to investigate 3 days later, finding a very nervous Moor. Under the circumstances, running that lighthouse must have been very spooky. And Muirhead was sympathetic to that as he was personally invested in getting to the bottom of what happened. As he closed out his report on the 8th of January 1901, I visited Flannan Islands when the relief was made so lately as 7th December, and have the melancholy recollection that I was the last person to shake hands with them and bid them adieu. What an awful, awful shame. Imagine the last thing that you ever hear from the outside world being a French word. While investigating, Muirhead also paid a visit to the Mackenzies over in Uig, who were in charge of keeping an eye out for signals and keeping track of when they saw the light. Being a time of poor visibility, no one could actually see the lighthouse tower between the 7th and the 29th, but they could see the light from it on the 7th and on the 12th, but they couldn't see it every day in between. After the 12th, the light wasn't actually seen again until Boxing Day, when Moore got it back up and running. While Muirhead was busy trying to shine a light on what actually happened, the locals tried to fill in the gaps themselves and got a little bit carried away, as Hebrideans tend to do. Specifically, they were caught up in a wave of speculation about the supernatural, fueled by subsequent keepers' claims that spooky voices called out the names of the missing keepers. Some locals also ended up believing that a sea serpent ate the keepers, or that they were carried away by a giant seabird. There is also another possibility. Aliens. A much more recent theory is that the keepers may have been abducted by aliens, or picked off one by a green space jellyfish that crash-landed in the nearby sea and decided to summon the mothership and turn the planet into a strategic base to aid in its people's war against the space potatoes. Yeah, the Eilean More disappearance actually inspired the 1977 Doctor Who episode Horror of Fang Rock, which is widely considered a certified hood classic in the scarf community. Those chugging along on a less ridiculous train of thought believe that the keepers were either kidnapped by spies or by pirates, or the keepers all simply bailed to start new lives, or they had actually tried to escape the island. Some believed that the keepers went all "why'd you spill your beans" and then killed each other in a fight, with survivors getting swept away while trying to dispose of the evidence. This theory holds a lot more water for some because allegedly MacArthur had a short temper, leading a lot of people to believe that he killed the others and then jumped off of a cliff out of guilt, which might explain why his oilskin was still hanging there. But despite the theories about the keepers going insane and turning on each other, their disappearances didn't actually influence Robert Eggers' The Lighthouse. That was actually influenced by a tragedy at the Smalls Lighthouse off the coast of Pembrokeshire, in which one of the two Thomases that were running the lighthouse died in a freak accident, and the other had a very awful time of trying desperately to protect the corpse from the elements because he was worried that he was going to be accused of murder, especially if he just disposed of the body properly. The whole ordeal of dealing with all of that while also trying to keep the light on all by himself was so emotionally traumatic for him that it became the reason why lighthouses were always crewed by 3 men from that point onwards. Also, watch The Lighthouse, it's a fucking excellent movie. What the Eilean Mort incident did inspire, however, was 2018's The Vanishing, starring Gerard Butler in a fit that goes hard. I would say that all 3 of the lighthouse keepers in that movie had immaculate drip, but that might be a little insensitive, all things considered. While it is set specifically on Eilean Mort, with the 3 keepers as characters, the movie is a complete work of fiction. Across the board, Chinese Whispers left the story deeply embellished over the years, as legends are wont to do across tellings. And these enhanced tellings are what other YouTubers and TikTokers will usually give you. And we did the exact same thing in this video, but we're also going to ruin the fun by setting the record straight and pointing out all of the horse shit. For example, the 3 ominous birds that Moore supposedly saw didn't happen. It didn't happen at all. There was never 3 giant black birds. They were not mentioned at all in his account, nor the presence of a canary in the lighthouse. There was also no mention of unmade beds in the official report. They were left, and I quote, as they normally were in the morning, which implies that the beds were probably made. But by far the biggest piece of misinformation was the famous logbook. It wasn't real. Some writer named Ernest Fallon made it up. I mean, there was a logbook as was standard at all lighthouses, but no entries about the storm were mentioned in official reports. The last entry was actually just work-related, rattling off barometer and thermometer readings, accounts of cleaning the lamp, and other things like that. It was fully filled out until the 13th, but drafts were made for the next 2 days that just hadn't been copied over yet. So, despite common belief, the keepers had not gotten scared and written "The lighthouse has fallen, 3 must die." They were just doing their work as usual until the 15th. Everything was completely fine until that afternoon, which lines up with the Arctur not seeing the light as she passed by. Much of the misunderstanding about what actually happened also came from a 1912 poem by Wilfred Wilson Gibson, titled Flannan Isle, which was quoted by Tom Baker's 4th Doctor at the end of the story that we discussed earlier.
Aye, though we hunted high and low, and hunted everywhere, of the 3 men's fate we found no trace. In any time, in any place, but a door ajar and an untouched meal, and an over-toppled chair.
Creative license was taken in the poem's composition, and a lot of tidbits were just taken as gospel, like the half-eaten meal and the overturned chair. Moore made no mention whatsoever of finding food on the table in his letter, and Muirhead's report noted that all of the kitchen utensils were perfectly clean. Most adaptations and retellings of the story were probably inspired by this poem than the actual event itself, hence all of the embellishments. But the truth isn't as exciting as all of the weird and wacky speculation. It's just depressing. No bodies were ever found, but I do think it's safe to say that the lighthouse keepers were most likely hanging out with Amelia Earhart, tragically leaving behind 2 widows and 6 children between them. After months of investigation, Muirhead came to the conclusion that there was no foul play. At the end of the day, he just applied Occam's razor and came up with a theory that I actually believe to be true. So the theory is that on the 15th, Marshall and Ducat were out at the West Landing securing ropes and the supply box, and while they were doing this, a rogue wave knocked both of them or one of them into the water. They screamed for help, which made MacArthur rush out of the lighthouse to try and rescue them, hence not putting on his oilskin on the way out. And while trying to help them, he also fell into the water and all of the men drowned. In other words, it was just an absolutely tragic accident that cost the men their lives. Muirhead figured that it was a rogue wave that did this because the direction of the wind would have only pushed the men further inland. Some people, however, have called bullshit on this, not believing that 3 experienced lighthouse keepers would be caught off guard by a wave. But what many lubbers don't understand is that waves can be fucking gigantic. The box that had its contents strewn about all over the West Landing was actually 33 metres above sea level, which was well within the range of a rogue wave, which tends to be around 30-ish metres tall. That said though, anything bigger than that does sound pretty fucking mental, and it makes one wonder how turf could be ripped up 10 metres inland from a 60-metre cliff by a wave. There have been reported sightings of rogue waves big enough to do such a thing, but who's to say whether they are just extremely rare natural phenomenon or just the tall tales of sailors. That said though, the image of an absolute fucking monster of a wave that could do that much damage is pretty fucking horrifying. And like I said earlier, the North Atlantic is basically hell. We can never know for certain how big the wave that took the sailors out actually was, nor can we definitively tell what happened to that turf, nor much of anything else that happened on that fateful day. But all I will say is, if it was a wave that did it, then that was a hell of a fucking wave. Of course, no one wanted something like this happening again, so steps were taken to make the lighthouse keeper's job much less treacherous. For instance, in 1925, wireless telegraph was introduced to enable better communication with the lighthouse keepers. Sure, it couldn't get them any immediate support if something went wrong, but at least they could reliably contact and converse with the mainland, who could offer advice and quickly dispatch help if necessary. It wouldn't have seen that much use, however, because the lighthouse was ultimately automated in September of 1971, to the great dismay of many of the emotionally scarred, lonely, capital R romantic men of today. But because the sense of melancholic solitude wasn't ruined enough, there is also a helipad there now. Also, the autistic community was thoroughly shafted in the 60s as the supply railway was also replaced with a road for a 3-wheeled motor vehicle. That last change is especially offensive because, as a libertarian, I hate roads. I know that the resolution to the whole mystery was a bit anticlimactic, and that there was no real fallout beyond lessons learned. Despite how good an estimate we can make of what happened from the meagre clues that we were left with, the lack of definitive evidence will always leave a big question mark hanging over the island that really adds to the mystery and tragedy of the story. And the relative lack of closure must have weighed on everyone involved, especially those who had to work the lighthouse in the subsequent decades. Imagine being the next team that gets sent to that lighthouse. Oh, by the way, the last team all vanished without a trace. No explanation. Anyway, I'll see you in 2 weeks. But despite the downer ending, I thought I would discuss this story anyway, because a lot of you in the comments miss the old Celtic Myths videos, and I do too, but unfortunately, not enough people were watching them and it was cooking me in the algorithm. So I thought I would throw you a bone with a bit of spooky Scotland lore. But if you really like those videos so much, you could have fucking watched them. Damn ye! Don't ye watch me Celtic Myths? You're fond of me video, ain't ye? Like it! Hark! May the algorithm strike ye dead! No, but seriously, go watch The Lighthouse.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube! Everybody subscribe!